It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either by going to my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Got an email this weekend from this fellow named Tom. He's a listener to the show, and he has been researching this notorious Texas serial killer named Dean Corll. Now, I hadn't heard of Dean Corll. He's known as the Candyman and the Pied Piper, and he's around Houston Heights. He would snatch up these little boys, mostly, I guess, around Houston Heights. And he also had some guy stumbled upon him killing a kid, and he just hired the guy. This guy starts helping him. Just incredible. It's amazing how these people find each other. That's what I always wonder about. But he had these two fellows helping him out, these two young men. Who are they? Right. Henley and Brooks.
Yeah, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. and David Owen Brooks.
Well, there we go. Mr. Tom is a shot out of a cannon. So, Tom, before we get started the whole story about Dean Corll, tell us about yourself. Who is Tom? How do you get involved in all this kind of stuff? What makes your interest in these things?
Okay, so I'm just a regular dude. I'll call myself an amateur armchair investigator, double negative on that one, because, yeah, I have no experience in this kind of work. But what what initially spurred me on was that I think it was WGN aired the segment about Sherry Marino, William Dorsch helped, and Steve Becker helped facilitate, where they revealed the connections between notorious pedophile kingpin John David Norman and his right-hand man working for Gacy's PDM contractors. And that just blew my hair back. And then I realized this John David Norman guy was busted like a week after the Corll case came to public light here. And then I just started pulling these threads back, and man, it's massive rabbit hole. Tons of pedophile rings all across the country are involved in this, and honestly, a lot of the ones that are involved in this particular case aren't talked about too much, even in a lot of these heavy research circles with this stuff. So
yeah, Corll I'd never heard before, but now you're talking about William Dorsch. He's the PI that I had on the show, and I've been trying to book that show. I was trying to book that show before I had him for years and years, because I was in touch with the attorney who was involved in that whole DNA case with that young boy who they alleged was underneath Gacy's house, and the mother was convinced that was not her son.
Mm-hmm. That's a wild story, too.
It's a wild story, like I said. And Dorsch came on the show, and he says, we know where there's other bodies. They won't let us dig. I've seen letters from the ground-penetrating radar company. Dorsch sent them to me, saying that we know where the bodies are. They're right around that corner there. The cops will let us dig 5 feet next to it, but not where the bodies are. Okay? Now, get this, man. You don't even know this story, Tom. Okay? This is off-the-air stuff. I get an email saying, hey, Ed, the picture of that kid who's supposed to be buried under Gacy's house and the mother thinks the DNA is incorrect, here's a picture of that kid 4 years later at Rodney Acala's house, the dating game killer. And he sent me the two pictures.
Really?
It's the same kid. The kid was kept alive, and somehow there's a picture of him at Rodney Acala's house, a dating game killer.
Oh, my
who took a class from Roman Polanski and dumped one of his bodies on Marlon Brando's porch or front lawn, let's say. Okay, he was raping, killing these people in his mother's house, mother's apartment, tiny little apartment. No one gets arrested but him. But now, who's the fellow that was the pedophile that had like the 4,000 names in his Rolodex and then they lost the Rolodex? Who's that fellow?
John David Norman.
John David Norman. Okay, so he's connected to this Dean Corll case. So let's start this.
Well,
tell us who Dean Corll is first, and then tell us all the connections.
Okay, so Dean Corll was a 33-year-old Texas lineman for the power company, not a football player, for the power company.
Right.
And his name, the Candyman, which is one of his infamous monikers, actually came from his family-owned candy company back in the 60s in Texas when his mom used to live there. and used to work for it, and he got his name because it was right across the street from an elementary school, and he would pass out free candy to the kids, so he kind of got that. And we really don't, and the thing about Dean Corll and partially why I think this case is kind of obscure is because we don't know anything about the guy other than what other people say about him, because he was shot dead by his accomplice, Elmer Wayne Henley, while he was attempting to rape and murder the two other people with him. So he shot him like 6 times, and police come, and he just starts spilling the beans on his relationship with this guy. And it turns out that Dean Corll had been paying him $200, which is about the equivalent of $1,000 nowadays, to lure in boys from the neighborhood. Some of these kids went to school with. And he lured them in for Dean to torture, rape, and murder them. And the details of those crimes are absolutely heinous. I won't talk about them on air, but if people want to read about it, viewer discretion advised. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there's a ton of victims, and it seems also, too, since they came from this area of Houston Heights, I think it's called, or something, that the cops didn't care because it was like a poor neighborhood. These are probably all the same faces they were seeing all the time causing trouble, these kids, you know? And so when they disappear,
And from what I've read, the Houston Police Department was willfully understaffed because the chief at the time wouldn't take federal funding. And Houston's a massive city. You know, it's a big, rich city in that time. So there's missing persons all the time, a bunch of runaways because, you know, it's the 70s and that was a big thing in that time, which was, you know, hitchhikers and runaways. So Henley talks to the police and says that, there was another person involved, a kid named David Owen Brooks. And they find Brooks. I can't remember where he was living, but he had moved out of the city with his wife, and I think he was having a kid. And they get him, and he starts telling them the same stuff that, you know, and this is what you mentioned earlier where, David Owen Brooks was getting molested by Dean before this whole fiduciary agreement to bring boys to him. And he walked in on Dean torturing and raping 2 kids bound up in his apartment. So Dean goes up to David Owen Brooks and says, I work for this pedophile ring. And these boys, after I was done with them, I just shipped them to California. And then he confesses, no, actually, I just murdered these boys. Apparently, being part of a pedophile ring is a easier excuse, apparently. But he bought his silence by getting him a 1969 Corvette. And eventually, he, you know, came up with the agreement, $200 for a boy from the neighborhood. And actually, Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. was a boy that David Owen Brooks was canvassing. But he got along with Dean, so he joined up with Dean. They went on a murder spree where they recovered 28 bodies. But I am sure there are far, far more than that, because when they went to go dig up these bodies, the police refused to dig up 2 additional bodies that Henley was pointing out on the beach, because they found tons of bodies in this boat shed in South Houston that Dean Corll owned. It's pretty much like John Wayne Gacy's crawl space, but in a boat shed. Yeah. Same operation, lime, all that kind of stuff. And then they ran out of room, so they started burying them on the beach. What was the name of the beach? Excuse me here. Well, anyways, they went to the beach, found 5 more bodies. Well,
it was a beach in Jefferson County on the Bolivia Peninsula.
Yeah, and it is a wild scene, right? Because there's kids playing, making sand castles while you have a bunch of police officers digging up bodies on the beach. So there's whole families there watching this all go down.
Wow.
And this whole effort to recover these bodies is pathetically bad, because they basically took a bunch of prisoners out to go dig these bodies up with no kind of, like, care for the forensics of it. Just stick a metal shovel in the ground, dig till you hit something, which is not a good thing to do if you're trying to collect evidence of a murder.
Yeah, it was around 1973, though, and it was a whole different world back then. They really weren't, the cops would pick up evidence with their hands, and I don't think they had evidence bags back in those days. They would ask, anybody got a bag? You know?
Yeah, no, some of them, like I think I remember like one of the earlier Zodiac, one of the first Zodiac murders, were like, yeah, please just clean this up.
Yeah.
You know, we're not gonna collect all this stuff. Just get the gruesome stuff out of here, please.
Yeah.
And but yeah, the thing that kept coming up in the Dean Corll case was he kept telling his accomplices that he was associated with this, ring of pederasts out in Dallas. And Dean Corll would say that, oh yeah, I know guys out there. We trade notes. They're into the same stuff I am. He mentions this guy named Art, who says he's a married guy out in Dallas. And Brooks attested to seeing a piece of paper with Art's name and phone number on it. I don't know who this Art guy is. But, yeah, he told the same thing to Henley. Yeah, I work for an organization. They run dope and prostitutes, boy prostitutes. And he would even threaten the boys with the organization saying, if you turn on me, organization's going to get you. So don't mess with me. And, this is common knowledge even in the mainstream thing of the case. Mm. And the mainstream story is, well, it's just Dean Corll and these two kids running their own little, like, pedophile torture murder ring. But about a week later, the Dallas police received, I believe it was from the FBI, a report from this guy named... Give me a second to get his name out of here. Charles Brizendine, who had worked for this guy named Alan Hitchcock, who turns out to be John David Norman. And he finds in his filing cabinet a bunch of pictures of young boys with the words kill stamped on it.
Wow.
Now, a lot of people say, well, because Norman's running... If you guys know about Norman, he is running like this kind of newsletter and stuff like that, along with this prostitution ring and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of people say, kill is not necessarily meant to be taken literally. It's kind of like a publication term that, we don't need these materials anymore, so we can get rid of them. But anyways, they arrest this Norman guy on marijuana charges, not any child pornography charges, nothing like that, just marijuana charges. And they find just tons of stuff in his apartment. Like they find, an address book, these pink index cards with addresses and names of 50 to 100,000 people around the country who want to order these boys and their preferences and all this kind of stuff. Hmm. And this stuff is real too, because if you watch the Investigation Discovery documentary, The Clown and the Candyman, which I highly recommend your viewers listen to the podcast and watch that documentary because there's some exclusive footage. And they have footage of Norman's arrest and all the evidence in the police station. And this is the 70s, so these guys are brazen. They're just putting the camera right up in these pink index card boxes and going through it. And they're censored in the documentary, but yeah. So this stuff is real. And they said and they found a bunch of printing materials, all this kind of stuff. And they send, from what I remember, the chain of custody with those cards was the Dallas PD sends them to the FBI. The FBI sends them to the State Department. And when further inquiries are made to the State Department, they say, oh, they're not relevant to any case pertaining to passports, so they destroyed the files. And that's a common theme in this story. These giant address name lists just going missing. No one can find where they are. And so, Norman gets out on $7,000 bond, goes to Homewood, Illinois. And in October, this guy's already getting canvassed again by the police because there's this kid, this 13-year-old named Kenny Hellstrom, who was brought in by his parents to the police station because this guy named Stephen Gurwell was inviting him and his friends over, giving them, booze, drugs, showing them porn movies, performing sex acts on them. And they get to the Steve Gurwell guy. He's not there, but he's living with another guy And they basically figure out this is John David Norman, the guy who just fled Dallas. Already has his operation set up, tons of names in a filing cabinet. Again, people made inquiries into the Homewoods evidence for those cards. Gone. Missing. Completely. So he gets arrested.
Wait, you're saying this Norman guy had the same situation twice, where all this evidence disappeared twice?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, because you said that they had sent this information to the State Department. Now, what's the official reason they sent this to the State Department?
It was not relevant to any case concerning a passport or something like that.
That's what the State Department's response was. That's what the State Department's response was. But my question is, why would you send a United States local crime to the U.S. State Department? That was the FBI's doing. Yeah. Because, I mean, to all fairness to the police, this is interstate crime here. Yeah, send this to the guys who can handle this. Well, they just send it to the State Department. Okay. Makes no sense. John David Norman's in Cook County Jail, and this is where he meets his infamous right-hand man, Philip Paskey. Philip Paskey is in for accessory to armed robbery and murder because him and two other guys were robbing this coin collector, and the coin collector got stabbed and ended up contracting pneumonia from that wound and dying. So Paskey's in jail with Norman, and they hit it off. They're like best of buds. So when Paskey gets paroled in, I think, like 75, 76, he's running John Norman's operation from the outside. Well, John Norman has commandeered the printing presses in the prison to keep printing his little pedophile thing. Really? Newsletter thing. Yeah. And then Norman gets out. And, this is the time when Gacy murders are going on. And I want to take a little detour real quick. I found this piece of information, or I was shown to me, a Franklin connection to the Gacy case. As in Franklin cover-up?
Yeah, Franklin cover-up.
Okay.
So there is this book called The Mystery of the Carefully Crafted Hoax. Have you ever read this? It's by the Nebraska Leadership Conference.
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, so they have a little biography about Paul Bonacci, right? One of the primary witnesses in the Franklin cover-up. They go over his family history. So he's born to, his biological father, and his mother's name is Marilyn May, and they get divorced, right? And she marries this guy named Jack McCoy. And there's a weird line in there where Bonacci says he loved his stepfather, but he couldn't tell him for some reason. I really don't know what that means. But anyways, 1983, July 4th, 1983, Jack McCoy dies. This is stated in this document. Well, if you go to Find a Grave, the Find a Grave website, and search for a Jack McCoy that fits all that criteria, married to a Marilyn M., died in July 1983. You know who his son is?
No, huh?
Timothy McCoy, who was the first canonical Gacy victim.
Oh, really?
He was the hitchhiker he picked up at a Greyhound bus stop and killed out of self-defense because he thought he was going to stab him because he woke up and he saw he was holding a knife. Turns out the kid was making breakfast, according to Gacy. So, yeah, Paul Bonacci's stepbrother is John Wayne Gacy's first known murder victim.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. that blew my hair back.
Yeah, that's interesting, man.
And there's some other Franklin stuff I'll get into here later, but yeah, John Norman gets out of eventually John Norman gets paroled, I think about 77, and he starts running this starts running his operation, the Delta Project, which is the most well known, because earlier was the Odyssey Foundation in Texas. So he's running the Delta Project, and this becomes a massive news story. I'm sure you are familiar with that Chicago Tribune expose on the nationwide pedophile rings. from 1977. Have you read that?
And what was it about, though? Which ring?
It was about a bunch of them. It was about that Boy Scout troop in New Orleans, and just all across the country, and how these guys are in contact.
I'm not aware of that.
All right, well, I'll send those to you.
Okay.
It was a big cover story, and it actually spurred on the first congressional hearings about child pornography, because before then, child prostitution laws were a little weird because it was under like a white slavery. That was really the only law, was white slavery, and it was only really focused on girls, as far as I know.
Yeah.
So we didn't really have we didn't have good laws for this because we didn't really understand it at the time. And John Norman's arrested in about 1978. Find index cards, all this kind of stuff. And a weird quote in that article where he gets arrested. They say Philip Paskey is present but not arrested. So he was in the apartment when the police raided it, but he was not arrested, which is really weird. Anyways, and how this connects to Gacy is Philip Paskey gets introduced to Gacy by one of his accomplices, David Cram. David Cram and Michael Rossi are the two accomplices of Gacy who confessed to digging holes in the crawl space. Yet somehow they never got prosecuted for it. Because I don't know how you dig holes in that crawl space and don't know there's something down there. Even Gacy said that. He was like, yeah, if you didn't know there was something down there, you're effing stupid. You know?
Yeah, but that's really common in all these cases. There's other people involved in all these cases, man, that never get touched. Like we were just talking, I know it was on the air or off the air, but with Rodney Acala, how could his mother not know what was going on? But you hear these things over and over and over again. The case in Vegas where this guy shot up a supermarket. He had kidnapped this prostitute the night before and tortured and raped her in his parents' house. There's no way the parents could have known about it. It just over and over you hear these stories. Where things just go on in front of witnesses and other people living with them, accomplices drove with them in the car, and no charges.
Yeah, no charges. And, Gacy even said multiple times, there's even a key list that Philip Paskey had keys to Gacy's house.
Wow.
And so apparently Paskey and Cram know each other because their fathers were burglars together. And, you know how... this is according to what I've heard. You know how David Cram gets Gacy's trust in Philip Paskey? He says, oh, this guy's cool. He's killed people.
Wow.
So you know these guys were doing some dirt, you know? And, yeah, Philip Paskey works for John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy is caught, 33 boys. We all know the story. And, yeah, pretty much up until his death, he maintained there were others involved. He mentions Paskey in this NBC interview. There's several tape recordings of him talking about Norman and Paskey. Paskey kind of just disappears, dies in 1998. He's really don't know much about this guy at all. And then Norman, he gets out in early 80s, 79, 80. And he goes to Pennsylvania and starts up the same thing again, but this time under the disturbing name of Handy Andy.
Wow.
And I'm convinced that these guys, or that Norman probably crossed paths with Jerry Sandusky at some point. I wouldn't be surprised. And another interesting aside, because he was on the run, because eventually, obviously, the stuff caught up to him in Pennsylvania. And he kind of hide down across the country. I mean, they eventually find him in Chicago, but he also hides out in Colorado. And here's a little interesting, another Franklin tie-in. I pulled his CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation record on Norman. And while it didn't really have much, it did have a list of aliases. And one of the aliases was the Colonel, which is really interesting because, if I remember correctly, Paul Bonacci attests that the last time he saw Johnny Gosh was with some guy named the Colonel in Colorado. And I gotta find out. I don't have it with me right now, but there was something where Paul Bonacci, when he used to be involved in like these Franklin discussion groups, he said that the Colonel was not Michael Aquino, like many people think he was. And I kind of did the math, and John Norman would have been in that area at the time.
So you think John Norman is the Colonel?
Could be. I don't know.
Okay.
I really don't know. But it's just an interesting little tidbit of information that I throw it out there. But let's rewind back to 1973. When they bust John Norman's Odyssey Foundation, they find tons of child porn, of course. And they find one that was from California. And they catch, and when they go through it, they catch the reflection of the cameraman in the mirror at a Holiday Inn room. So they send it out to California to these two detectives named Martin Lloyd and Don Smith. So they start looking into this, and they come across this man named Guy Straight. Guy Straight is a interesting character for sure. Let's see here. He was born in Texas in 1920, and he calls himself the Michelangelo of kitty porn. So I'm going to tell you what this guy is. And he was probably one of the most successful child pornographers in that era. And, yeah, he was running a child pornography ring with a bunch of other guys in California with kids from as little as 6 to 17 years old. And they're working under the name Lyric-DOM. DOM. And there's debate of what that stands for, because some people say it stands for dirty old man. Straight says it's Dominus, which is Latin for Lord. But whatever. There's actually there's an interview with him, a whole chapter dedicated to him in this book called Children in Chains by Clifford Linedecker, which I recommend you try to seek him out. I think he might be still alive.
Okay.
But yeah, it's from like 1980, and it's a whole thing about child pornography and rings and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, this guy, so Guy Straight, went in the Army in the 40s. He campaigned for Eisenhower and Nixon. He was actually a Boy Scout leader in the late 30s in Texas, which is creepy. And then in the 1950s, he moved to San Francisco. And by the time the 60s came around, he became like this counterculture icon, kind of. He's also a big crusader of gay rights. He even supported, what's his name? Jose Sarria, which was the first openly gay candidate to run for office in 1961. And he also had this publication called Cruise News and World Report, which was a play on another publication called U.S. News and World Report. And they actually got pretty pissed off about it, so he had to drop the name. But it was basically, he called it a muckraking tabloid, basically, kind of underground newspaper. And, he came after the cops and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, he was one of the earlier people to call out J. Edgar Hoover's closeted homosexuality, which will be relevant here in a minute. And then mid-60s, he moves around Haight-Ashbury, starts this, photography, sexual photography, pornography business with children, of course. And he had, like John Norman, over 50,000 names of clients all over the United States. He says that only 950 are actually customers. There are just a lot of dummy ones in there for theft insurance, whatever the hell that means. Yeah. And he also, in that interview, also denies having any involvement with the mafia. But Linedecker says he's very, kind of short and reluctant with this, talking about this kind of stuff. And the LA District Attorney Office suggests that Straight was running a little boy brothel in Miami and shipping boys over from San Francisco. He also talks about how he's, quote-unquote, raised over 40 wayward boys, showering them with gifts, teaching them about sex, all this kind of nasty stuff. And So yeah, they bust this ring, and he's working with this other guy. This is where the lyric comes in. This guy named Billy Byers Jr. was running this company called Lyric International, which was a film production company, much like what Guy Straight was doing. Also from Texas, from Tyler, Texas, and we'll get more into that here in a minute. He's running this, what he calls physique photography, where it's just an excuse for him to photograph underage boys. And in 1972, he makes this film called The Genesis Children, which is an experimental art film where he has nude boys running around on the beach for 40, 50 minutes. And it was pretty controversial back in the day. It got an X rating. And there's an article in this magazine called After Dark. And this guy, it's one of the most pretentious interviews I've ever read. This guy is like a serial liar or something like that, because he claims, I have a PhD in molecular biology, physics, all this stuff, but I also know how to do art, and I'm a data analyst and all this stuff. Just a whole bunch of lies.
Well, Tom, let me ask you this real quick. How are you getting all these archives of these articles and stuff, and you're reading all these books, and you're finding these archives online, or you're ordering them?
Yeah, I'm finding the archives online and cited sources, and I'm actually ordering the source if I can find it.
Okay.
So I actually do have a copy of that magazine with that article in it. And I actually have a transcript that I can send you too, because I transcribed it.
Well, you're planning to write a book about all this?
Thought about it. I'm not sure yet.
Okay. I think you should.
Yeah.
It's not all in one. It's not all in one place, And there's so much here that, even the average person it doesn't even know who Paul Bonacci is. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not even halfway through the story yet.
Yeah. Okay, but then let me slow you down, because we're about halfway through the show. We only got about 20 minutes left.
Okay.
25.
So Billy Byers Jr., as you can guess, he has a father, Billy Byers Sr. So this Billy Byers Sr. guy, he is an executive for Humble Oil, and he came up in Tyler, Texas during the Texas oil boom, along with Clint Murchison and Sid Richardson, so two of the richest men in the country at the time. And he's friends with all these people. He's friends with Eisenhower. There's actually personal correspondence between Eisenhower and Byers and this guy named George Allen, thanking them for rehabilitating his Gettysburg Angus ranch. And this kind of became a big controversy in the 50s. There's this one reporter who was just going after these guys, saying, this is just pay to play, you guys are, all this kind of stuff. And another guy that Billy Byers Sr. is really close friends with is none other than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover.
Remind us again, though, what was the significance of Billy Byers Jr.? What's his story again?
He is running the pedophile ring with Guy Straight.
Gotcha. Okay, and his dad knows J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah, his dad knows J. Edgar Hoover, and so does Billy Byers Jr. But his dad knows J. Edgar Hoover because they have adjacent bungalows at Murchison's Hotel Del Charro in La Jolla, California. So these guys are like best friends. I actually have a newspaper clipping about announcing Billy Byers Jr.'s birthday at the Hotel Del Charro. And in the newspaper, it said, in attendance, Clyde Tolson and J. Edgar Hoover. And if you've read Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover, I haven't read it all the way through because it's like 600 pages, but he interviews some guys. This guy named Charles Krebs. Charles Krebs claims to be an associate of Byers, and he claims that he accompanied Byers and an unknown old man, who I presume is Guy Straight, to bring boys out to Hoover in La Jolla.
Wow.
And he said this several times, that they would show up, Clyde Tolson and J. Edgar would be in a limo, send the boys in a limo and do the thing. And Don Smith and Martin Lloyd, the two LAPD detectives I mentioned earlier, so they were interviewing a bunch of like informants on the street, saying, "Yeah, these guys are trafficking us to all these, rich and powerful people, heads of corporations, musicians, actors," and they mentioned Tolson and Hoover. In fact, they even go as far as to say that Hoover was really frustrated about the fact that boys in the 70s had long hair and would constantly like harangue them to cut their hair. So yeah, all this stuff here, and there's tons of. I haven't even gotten down the rabbit hole of J. Edgar Hoover's sexual blackmail. Apparently, there's a lot of sexual blackmail schemes going on with J. Edgar Hoover. He's not the only guy.
When you think about the relationship between Hoover and Cohen, Roy Cohen, we've had one of Roy Cohen's victims on here, Richard Kerr, who describes.
Oh, yeah.
So that goes without saying. Just fascinating. All these guys are all got this stuff going on in their backgrounds.
And another interesting thing about J. Edgar Hoover is, according to Anthony Summers, I have not found the records of this personally, mainly because the files I got were disorganized in a kind of like a really frustrating way, because they weren't chronological by years. So I'd open one file, it's all call logs from like 1952, open another one, they're from 1961, open another one, 1959. So, but he claims that upon hearing the news that John F. Kennedy was shot, J. Edgar Hoover phoned up three people. Naturally, he phoned up Robert F. Kennedy, JFK's brother and Attorney General at the time, phoned up the Secret Service, and then he phones up Billy Byers Sr. Which is also interesting because, all those guys are from Tyler, Texas, and Herbert Walker Bush went out to Tyler that day. So, yeah, there's some interesting stuff with that.
So there's some interesting JFK connections. So now you also mentioned, too, that there was some drug smuggling connections. What do you have there?
Well, I mean, when it comes to a lot of these cases, it seems like these pedophile rings are also involved in drug smuggling. A lot of, because Dean Corll's accomplices talked about how they're, those pedophile rings are running dope too.
Yeah.
I think Gacy was talking about how Paskey was running dope and stuff. So I imagine that element is as intertwined with the pedophilia,
Yeah, you often find that there's private pilots, private planes, private pilots involved in both human trafficking and drug trafficking, and also arms.
Oh, yeah.
Overseas arms.
Yeah, Barry Seal.
Yeah, right. And, we had that woman on that Sex Trafficking Anonymous, Sex Workers Anonymous, I think it was, from Las Vegas, who said that there was sex trafficking that went on during Iran-Contra, too. That when we would send the arms down there, we were sending women down there, too, to these guys in the mountains. Oh, yeah. I mean, the sex trafficking, especially overseas, is like 10 times worse. Yeah. And, a lot of these guys are bringing in kids from Mexico. I mean, in the Homewood Police files, they mentioned John Norman going down to Mexico and bringing kids up and stuff like that. All of this kind of weird stuff, man. And, of course, Billy Byers Jr. doesn't go to jail. He skips town, presumably goes to Morocco, but is back in the United States because he's interviewed in 1988 by Anthony Summers in his J. Edgar Hoover book. But I don't know anything else about the whereabouts of this guy. I don't know if he's alive or dead. I looked up his Social Security death index, didn't come up with anything. So I really don't know. He'd be probably in his 80s or 90s right now. So I don't know what Billy Byers Jr. is doing. But Billy Byers Sr. died in 1965. And apparently even after his father's death, Billy Byers Jr. was getting Christmas cards from the Hoover family and all that kind of stuff. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And also included in this Lyric Dom pedophile ring bust, it's like a YMCA coach, gym teachers, who else was involved in this?
stuff. There was and there was also the son of actress Loretta Young.
Oh, really?
A guy by the name of Christopher Lewis. And he actually has an interview about how this went down. And, oh, man, it's crazy. He talks about, well, this is just hysteria. They're freaking out because of all the boys found in Houston. Because this is all directly tied into the Dean Corll investigation. This is all coming as a result of investigation related to this case. So...
That's not a very well-known case, of that Dean Corll case.
No, it's actually pretty relatively obscure, despite the fact that he had the highest body count for any serial killer until Gacy. And I mean, his MO is exactly the same as Gacy's.
Who's an interesting guy? Greg Bucciarini. You familiar with him?
No, I'm not.
Yeah, he's a survivor of all this kind of stuff, and he talks about Sandusky and organized crime and YMCAs and these boys club and stuff like that. And Mike Blutrich, too, the fellow who was involved with the Scores. I had him on the show. Okay, and then all these people start coming out of the woodwork saying that he molested them. There's a big lawsuit came out of it. And he worked for some YMCA type group, but it was a Jewish YMCA. It wasn't Young Men's Christian, but Young Men's, I guess, Jewish or whatever. Some kind of a Jewish YMCA type organization. They really, they're right in your face with the, we want young boys, Boy Scouts,
Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Insane record of child molestation. They even had like a personal file. I think they were called the perversion files or something like that.
Yeah.
Had all the names of these guys who had allegations against them, and it's just insane and terrifying too. I mean, didn't they have to file for bankruptcy protection because of all the lawsuits coming in?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they had to reorganize and stuff because of all the lawsuits. Yeah, and the Southern Baptist Church, same thing, and the Catholic Church too. And again, too, you have the whole blackmail aspect. So then, on top of that, with the Catholic Church, you have these confessionals where these people are coming in, giving all their secrets up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's just the original blackmail ring.
Right. And you think you could trust, well, he's a priest. We could trust. Meanwhile, the same guy is raping all these kids 24 hours a day. All they're doing is raping kids. Yep. Is their full-time job. Otherwise, when you read these grand jury reports that have come out in Pennsylvania just recently in Baltimore, when you read them, that's all they're doing.
Yeah, no, it's insane with these pedophiles because this seems to be the primary focus of their life.
Right.
And, it's insane, these guys. And if you really want to, back to that Children's in Chains book, if you really want to see in real time the mental inner workings of these guys, that Guy Straight interview really shows, all the mental hoops he jumps through to justify this stuff. I'm loving these boys. This is the First Amendment, blah, 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 blah. He even claims, I'm not actually really even sexually interested in this. But, guess what? Guy Straight gets arrested in 1976 in Phoenix, Arizona for 2 accounts. Or no, I think it's 2 accounts. Or maybe 4 accounts of child molestation back in Rockford, Illinois, where he initially went after the whole Lyric Dom ring got busted up. And, and he also went to New York for a while. So I'm really curious as to what he was doing out in New York. I don't really have any documentation on that. But that would have been probably between, 73 and early 76, late 75.
Yeah, that's right around the Son of Sam cult time, prostitution was running New York. And you're saying this book, Children in Chains, that's the Clifford Weinecker book?
Weindecker.
Yeah.
Weindecker. Yep. He also wrote a Gacy book called The Man Who Killed Boys. I have it, but I haven't read it yet. I gotta get my train of thought back together here. Straight goes to jail. And pretty much from there, it seems like he served through most of the 80s, got out, and died in March of 1986 in San Francisco. But it's kind of weird because he's one of the few people I've done a Social Security death index on, and they don't give an exact date for his time of death. It's just March 1986.
Let me ask you a question. Social Security Death Index, I know they shut down public access to that. So are you getting updated information? Because I don't even have a link to that anymore. I don't even bother with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just on this site, it's a genealogy site.
Okay.
So I was using it for research, and that was one of the resources. That's how I figured out John Norman's death date.
And
so I originally thought it was 2009.
Yeah,
so
2009, yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, because I think around 10 years ago they stopped updating around Sandy Hook, because it was being misused and abused so badly by these Sandy Hookers. Yeah. And, oh God. But when you run their names in databases, it'll come up deceased. Because the credit headers and stuff like that are used from credit card companies. So, and they know when you're deceased, because they write off it goes to the estate, so they know when you're deceased. So it comes up.
Yeah, you can see their social security number when they're deceased.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we've gone through all that. So let's go back to Dean Corll.
Okay.
So, there's lots of indications that he was running with other guys who were doing the same thing he was. Because there was a witness out from New Jersey, called herself Bonnie, and said she was closely acquainted with a Janet Blackman, who had told her that a close friend of Janet's named Miguel knew or had run around with Corll, and that he knew where 16 to 18 bodies were buried in the New York area. Yeah. And this probably would have been in the late 60s, I would assume. And Corll also talks about knowing guys in California. And Henley believes that there are bodies out in California because in 1976, LA officers came inquiring about something that an informant had told them, that one of their suspects for the freeway killers said he had known Corll and met him at Mardi Gras in New Orleans, and that they hung out in Texas and all this kind of stuff. Henley and Brooks deny knowing anything about it. And, they state multiple times that Dean was pretty secretive with his mail and would often burn it. But they did say he received a lot of, pederast-related material, so.
What about, occult behavior, occult activities?
I have not run across anything indicating that in this case. I'm not saying that it isn't anything. It case from the fact that he's in New York.
Yeah.
Possibly killing all these boys. And I know he said there was, this cult in Yonkers.
Yeah.
That was apparently sacrificing boys and stuff like that. But yeah, nothing came up about any kind of occult or Satanism aspects, but it's not off the table, but it's not in the files. I'm just going off of things that are in the files. And, all right, so let's go back to 1971. 1971, two brothers go missing by the names of Donald and Jerry Waldrop. And they were eventually found in the boat shed as bodies number 9 and 10. So his father, or the father of those two kids, files a missing persons report and gives the authorities information that he's running around with this guy named Roy Ames. My kids are running around with this guy named Roy Ames. He's a child pornographer. He's giving them drugs, making them do sex movies, all this kind of stuff. Police ignore it. All right, whatever. Eventually, when all this stuff comes out, he brings Ames back up. Now, Roy Ames is he's a Texas blues producer. He was responsible for cutting blues artist Johnny Winter's first albums, first records, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a long list of guys from that area that he's worked with. I'm not too familiar with all the blues stuff, so a lot of these names are just whatever. But yeah, he was referred to by one blues artist, Joe Guitar Hughes, as the Texas music rapist.
Wow. Because
this guy was a massive child pornographer. And his name more than any other of these guys' names, shows up more in the Dean Corll documents. Because the Waldrop father is not the only person who brought up Ames. Let's see here. There's another guy named Richard Van Payne, Payne. And this is coming from California. And he said he was in a warehouse in Houston. And he said that he saw child pornography featuring some of the victims of Dean Corll's, the Houston mass murder, excuse me. And then...
But is there anything in the official prosecution of Dean Corll that involved production of child pornography?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right, okay, so this is another account.
They completely ignored these leads. Yeah. No, once you hear more about this, you're going to be like, these guys didn't give any crap about this.
We got about 1 minute. We got about 1 minute left.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So this guy named Stephen Dale Ahern contacts them. He's a neo-Nazi LAPD informant, boy prostitute. Also, he was interviewed by the FBI because he made several threats against Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. And he was talking to his psychiatrist saying, oh, I have the urge to kill Kennedy, all this kind of stuff. So they bust Ames 74, find like 4 tons of child pornography. They bust him in 75 again, and guess what they find? They find 11 photographs identified as Dean Corll victims.
Wow.
You know what the police say? They say, we don't want to upset the victims more, the families more, and we got the guy anyway, so we're not going to inquire any further. Despite the fact that the same police department told all the families that it's their fault their kids got killed.
You know, I'd say it reminds me so much, too, of the cover-ups that went on around, who was that, of Jeffrey Dahmer, you know, the same. And I had one of the authors of a book came on, and I says, well, this is to kind of like cover up that story. He goes, yeah. You know, it's like kind of play down police misconduct. He goes, yeah. One of the retired cops I had on the show.
Yeah, the police misconduct in this case is just astounding.
Well, yeah.
It's astounding.
You got the director of the FBI involved in all this. You know, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you so much. We've been talking about the case of Dean Corll. Be sure and check that out. Children in Chains by Clifford Windecker is a book to check out. Windecker. And
I also recommend For Money or Love by Robin Lloyd. It's out of print, but it's about boy prostitution in America from the mid-'70s. And I also recommend checking out this documentary called Boys for Sale from 1980. It should be on YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen that too as well. Yeah, and it's several of those guys are dead now, right?
Yeah, no, the guy who was doing all that stuff, someone tried to kill him afterwards.
Yeah.
And then in like the 90s, he committed suicide. We can't find any information on that. Guy by the name of Tom Philpott, who's kind of a hero actually, because he went pretty hardcore undercover on this stuff.
Yeah, it's very common for people to be driven to suicide over this kind of thing, and we were just dealing with that just recently. Yeah. Tom, thank you so much. I encourage you to write a book about all this, or at least a blog or something like that. Put up a website with your information. You can't keep it all to yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, my
no,
friend?
I can't. That's why I'm calling you.
Okay. All right, man. Thank you so much, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, man.
Good night.